And this is NPR News. I'm Mike Mulcahy. Today we continue our series of congressional debates with the candidates from Minnesota's 3rd District. Republican Erik Paulsen is the incumbent. He was first elected to the suburban Minneapolis seat in 2008. He's a former Republican majority leader in the State House and serves on the Ways and Means Committee and chairs the Joint Economic Committee. He's being challenged this year by DFLer Dean Phillips. This is the first time he's run for office. He's the former CEO of his family's Phillips Distilling Company and currently owns Penny's Coffee, which has 2 locations in the Twin Cities. He has also served on the boards of several nonprofits. Gentlemen, thanks both for being here.
Good to be here, Mike.
Thank you, Mike.
And I'll tell you, we won't have a lot of rules today. We just want to be sure that you each have a fair chance to address the issues and say what you want to say. And because you're running for the House and not for the Senate, I would ask that you please don't filibuster. We won't take any calls, but I did ask people to send me questions over the past few days, and I hope to get to as many of them as we can. I wanted to start with what you and groups who support your campaigns have been saying on TV, because ads are the way that a lot of people are tuning into this campaign. First, Congressman Paulsen, let me ask you, what difference does it make whether or not Dean Phillips provided health insurance to his employees at Penny's Coffee?
Well, number one, it's an area where Dean's been a hypocrite. He said healthcare is a moral right, and we've clearly pointed out, and it has been fact-checked by KSTP, by WCCO, and by KARE 11, that claim that he claimed healthcare is a moral right, but yet didn't provide it for his own employees at Penny's Health, at Penny's Coffee, was a lie. And so that was fact-checked to true. So we're pointing that out and making it clear.
Dean Phillips? Respond?
Well, Mike, I got to say, I'm amazed that the congressman would start this debate with that contention, because KARE 11 and WCCO both said the same thing, which is that is false, and you know it. I have provided health care to every single full-time employee at every organization that I've ever managed, that I've ever built. And if the contention is that when I was interviewed by Forbes magazine and the Star Tribune, as we opened our first coffee shop, our only full-time employees were the 3 business partners, all of whom had health care outside of the organization. We have always provided health care, and you know that to be the truth. And what I think it's time for our country to recognize that we protect consumers from false and misleading advertising. The FEC does not protect voters from false and misleading advertising. And Congressman, your advertisements are false. You know it. They've been fact-checked. And I invite anybody listening to go to KARE 11, go to KARE 11 and go to WCCO TV and watch their fact checks.
Right,
they both indicated that contention was false.
So just to be clear, that's actually a lie, because WCCO, KSTP, and KARE 11 all fact-checked that claim on providing health care as a moral right, but didn't provide it to your own employees, was actually true on that claim.
But
and clarified that was the case.
Isn't the issue in the campaign, though, what is Congress going to do for people's health care? And I want to ask both of you, what would you do to make health care more affordable, more available to the people?
Well, absolutely. There are solutions to this that we will be talking about. But I do want to go back to one other thing, is that if, as you said to Forbes or to City Pages or the Star Tribune last year, if you were providing health insurance, you don't have to take our word for it in the ads. Why did you tell them you weren't at that point? Because you said you weren't.
Because we had no full-time employees.
And when did you hire your first full-time employee?
When we started providing health care.
And what was the date? What was the date of that? Because that's the key. What was the date?
Right. If I might just say that there's a great irony to this conversation, in that I've spent my entire career building businesses, providing jobs, providing health care to every full-time employee, serving on the boards of health care providers in our community through our family foundation, ensuring people who don't have health care, because of a lot of policies that you've implemented, trying to do so. The fact that you, who has voted so many times to strip the ACA, to repeal the ACA, and make it harder for people with pre-existing conditions to achieve health care is perhaps the greatest form of hypocrisy I've ever known.
And that's actually a point in one of Dean's ads that he's running, because he mentioned pre-existing conditions face to camera. And so we have backed up all of our claims in our ads with facts that have been fact-checked. But the claim that I don't support pre-existing conditions face to camera is patently false. In fact, the bill that I voted for clearly states out and is printed in the bill, clearly printed in, nothing in this act shall be construed as permitting health insurance issuers to limit access to health coverage for individuals with pre-existing conditions. And I talk about that every time, but talk about the need for health care reform and the solutions to actually lower costs. And you can support the Affordable Care Act, which robbed $700 billion out of Medicare, or that drove up premiums and destroyed Minnesota's health care market. But I am working on finding actual solutions to lower costs.
I think we see this just fundamentally differently. I believe the ACA needs to be fixed and improved, and there are ways to do so. I'd like to be a part of that. I think it's time that our nation does ensure, we make the moral decision to ensure that everybody has health care, because we are the only developed nation in the world that chooses not to do so right now. We also pay twice as much as any developed nation in the entire world for health care, yet our outcomes are mid-pack. I believe the best way forward is expanding Medicare as a buy-in option for Americans to choose. I believe in choice, I believe in the freedom to have options, and I believe in competition. I believe the way forward is to ensure that there is more competition and more choices. I also believe it's time that Medicare start negotiating prescription drug pricing, because our country right now subsidizes the entire world. Prescription drug pricing. We could save up to $230 billion over 10 years, Mike, if we simply mandated that Medicare negotiate pharmaceutical pricing. Last but not least, what we have to start talking about in this country is the cost of care. And no matter which way forward we choose to proceed, the cost of care is out of control in this country. And I think it's time that Medicare start playing a role in reforming our care delivery model, which would mean that we start rewarding prevention instead of procedures. And in that, we will save money and ensure that we have money to provide health care to everybody.
Erik Paulsen on health care. What will you do if you
I would just think the answer is this, is that it is coordinated care, it is chronic care management, and we do need to make reforms to Medicare, because 68% of all Medicare recipients have 2 or more chronic conditions. That's consuming 93% of all costs in Medicare. So physicians, physician assistants, doctors, they should be reimbursed for a coordinated care model for chronic care. That's important. That's the reform model forward. But on the broader the question of healthcare reform, more competition is important. It's not allowing a Medicare buy-in, because even groups like the AARP have said they've had concerns with that, because it could exacerbate the Medicare situation we have right now with higher premiums for our current recipients and seniors. I will not destroy current Medicare for our seniors right now, but value-based healthcare, so we're not just reimbursing providers based on the number of procedures that they do, but it is more wellness, it is more prevention, and they are rewarded for actually good outcomes on patients.
Let me get back to the ads for a second. Dean Phillips, you had that Bigfoot ad. It got a lot of attention, went viral. But do you really think voters in the 3rd District don't know who Erik Paulsen is and don't know how to find him after he's been in Congress for 10 years?
Well, I believe representation begins with listening, Mike, and I've been doing so for a year and a half in the district, driving my truck around, listening to people, and time again, every single day, from thousands of people, it's the same message, that they believe it's a responsibility of a member of Congress to show up, to host town hall meetings. I've already publicly stated that I would host at least one open, accessible public town hall meeting in various parts of the district every quarter, in addition to hosting policy forums, because I've recognized a need and an appetite to educate voters about the issues of the day. We've had 3 already on campaign finance reform, on the environment, on health care, and the answer is yes. In fact, that ad is really a hallmark of our campaign, because it was all done by local people. Volunteers, the local creative community, and our country needs a little bit of dose of levity right now in our politics, and that ad was a nice example of how we could bring a little bit more humor and, frankly, decency to the discourse.
Well, and one thing I'll mention is obviously being accessible as a member of Congress and being a listener is key and important to being effective, and I've got a strong reputation of that, whether it's hosting 23 different telephone town hall meetings in the last year and a half, my own personal in-person town hall meetings. Now, some of those town hall meetings were very uncivil, with outbursts and boos and screaming, and people don't want to come and be yelled at or screamed at. They want to make sure they've got a voice. So I've done additional 150 individual business visits, my 249th school visit this week, 60-some community forums, and individual office hours with more than 150 personal constituent meetings. You would be hard-pressed to find any individual who said they weren't able to even meet with me if they wanted to meet with me privately, and that's very important. I do take one exception, and I don't complain much about the ads that are put up, but I will take exception to one of Dean's other ads that is up right now. And that's the one where he is essentially mocking or making fun of one of my congressional staffers, who is a young 20-year-old on his first job. And we had a time when I think congressional staff were sort of off limits. But there are bits and pieces where you direct folks to your website, and then you say, and the voices are that they make it sound like I'm evasive or I'm not responsive. This was an intern and a first staffer with a speech impediment who was going to a speech therapist. And, you can imagine sort of how that makes him feel. But I think that is just pathetic.
Well, if I might say, I think it's a core responsibility of every member of Congress to appear in public. And Congressman, for a year, I've been asking you, inviting you to simply appear in a public forum at which any member, any voter can come and ask both of us questions. I think that is such a basic responsibility. And by the way, we live in challenging times, and conversation is sometimes challenging. Despite that, I will absolutely hold public town hall meetings regularly so that people can challenge me. And I got to tell you, I learn more from people who see things differently than me. And that's a hallmark of this campaign. Republicans joining Democrats on my campaign to do it differently.
Okay.
And as for that ad, I might just say that what we were pointing out is truth, which is that even your staff can't tell voters where they can find you. And that is my contention. And by the way,
to mock and make fun of someone with a speech impediment is wrong. And I think that is pathetic. And I am accessible. And I will continue to hold town hall meetings and be accessible. And I've done community forums. I'm not going to go to campaign rallies and events with one side just to suit your needs.
Well, then I will accept your invitation to appear in a public forum at any time.
Yep. All right. Let me just, I got a question from a listener. Just on this subject of ads, which two ads for your campaign do you think give the voters in the 3rd District the best insight as to why they should vote for you? And Congressman Paulsen, start with you.
Well, one ad I'll mention right off the bat is that it is important, regardless of who you are or who you represent in your community, that you're willing to stand up to your own party, even if it's the president. And one of those ads that I've been running is protecting Minnesota's Yellowstone, which is the Boundary Waters Canoe area. And I said no to my own party when there was a bill on the floor. I said no to the administration when they were shortchanging a review, an environmental review that was put in place by the last president. And I think it's important to allow that review to go forward. And growing up and having the ability to travel to the Boundary Waters and knowing it's an important wilderness area, that's one key component that we've emphasized in one of our ads.
Okay. That's
I'd love to respond to that, because the ad that the congressman's referring to is one where he calls the Boundary Waters Minnesota's Yellowstone, indicating that he's filming it in front of the Boundary Waters when in fact it's at a lake in Chaska, I believe. And to say that you stand up for your own party when you vote 98% of the time with Donald Trump and about an equal amount with your own party in a district that is so purple is a very odd contention to me, and frankly hypocritical. Now, I'm proud of the message I'm trying to send, which is there's a better way to do this.
Okay.
There's an inclusive way.
Let's let the Congressman respond.
Well, first of all, the 98% figure that Dean has used is a great bumper sticker slogan, but it's not truth. You say truth is truth. But look, the fact is, if you look at what President Trump has signed into law, 70% of what he has signed has been bipartisan. That's actually the best record of any president in the last 20 years. And of that 70%, Amy Klobuchar's voted for 91% of those issues. So keeping the government open. Dean, would you have voted against that? Keeping the government open?
98%
Would you have voted against giving our military pay the highest pay raise they've had? Would you have voted against that? Those are the issues I voted for.
The question is about standing up to your own party and your record. Records are records, and they're truth.
Dean Phillips, which two ads that you've run do you think give voters the best reason for voting for you?
I believe my first ad, the Bigfoot ad, is a hallmark of our campaign, because we're showing that the political nonsense that is littering our airwaves that has got to come to an end. That's an example of at least using a little bit of humor, which I will bring to this discourse. And I intend to show that we can do this differently and we can do this better. Principle over party, the collaboration that we have lost, and the hallmark of this campaign and my slogan is everyone's invited. It's a different way of doing it. Some recommended against doing it. But Republicans joining this campaign, joining Democrats, independents, even libertarians, and sending that message through our advertising. The sad truth is that when you're subject to about $8 million in atrocious, misleading, and false attack ads, I have a responsibility to share some truth. Right. And frankly, that is my responsibility, and I'll continue to do so.
Well, I will just say that everything Dean is saying, I'm actually practicing. If you're looking for someone who's collaborative, who cooperates, who compromises to get things done, that's exactly what I've been doing as a member of Congress, whether it's working with members of our own delegation on important legislation like anti-human trafficking and sex trafficking efforts with Senator Klobuchar, or standing up to my own party and being bipartisan, or pushing some issues on climate change, for instance. And so bipartisan efforts are important. I'm number 3 in the entire Congress for getting bipartisan co-authors of my bills. That includes the Senate and the House, by the way. So it's a model I think that is important for legislators to listen and to follow up and cooperate and collaborate.
If I may respond to that, though, too, perhaps at the very top end getting co-signers, but Congressman, that same website indicates that I think you're second to the very bottom in getting those bills signed into law. And there may have been a time where you were immoderate and collaborated, but 98% of the time with Donald Trump is truth. That is the record. Anybody can go online and fact check that. And I remember there was a time when you were part of the Bipartisan Problem Solvers Caucus, and you're no longer a member. Things have changed. That's clear by your voting record. And at least let's talk about truth. That is my only request in this entire debate.
Yeah.
Erik Paulsen.
Well, I think it's important to be true with one. The ad that was mentioned, the Bigfoot ad, is not true because I have been doing all the community outreach and forums. And I'm one of only a handful, 34 members of Congress, that actually got a bill signed into law by President Obama. So it doesn't matter who the president is. When it's a good idea, I will work forward to passing initiatives on a bipartisan basis. That's been clear. I was never a former member of the Problem Solvers Caucus. The caucus wanted a rule that said if the group votes, you have to stick together as a group. And I think that's been a dysfunctional component of Washington because the Freedom Caucus and other groups have been dividing parties, going more left and more right. And so I will never turn over my voting card to some other group. I will always use it to protect Minnesota and my district. But I do go to Problem Solvers meetings because I get along with those members of Congress and know them very well.
Then we see it differently. I hope, should I have the honor of serving, that is the first caucus I wish to join, and that's quite a contrast because I think that's how Congress should work. Democrats and Republicans joining together to come up with thoughtful solutions, bring them to the House floor and work together. That is, in fact, the fundamental difference, I think, between these two campaigns.
That's Dean Phillips. You're listening to a live debate between Dean Phillips, he's a Democrat, and Erik Paulsen, he's the Republican incumbent in Minnesota's 3rd Congressional District. Election day, just a little more than 30 days away now, and so we're trying to let the candidates speak for themselves on where they stand on the issues that matter. Let me talk about the tax bill that passed last year. Congressman Paulsen, you helped write that bill. You think it's a good deal for the people in the 3rd District? Why?
Well, it's certainly performing very well on the economic announcements that were just made today. The lowest unemployment now since 1969 for the country. Actually, the 3rd District in Minnesota has the best unemployment record, the lowest unemployment in the entire country at 1.9%. So tax reform is about making an efficient economy even stronger. And modernizing our tax code. So it's everything we said it should be, lower rates for everybody, and at the same time build it for growth. So we've seen consumer confidence at record levels, small business confidence at record levels, more wages going up, pay raises, as well as investment and productivity increasing. So we've gone from 2% growth to 4% growth. And honestly, the results are much more stronger than any of us really expected they would be only 10 months.
Dean Phillips, would you have voted for that bill?
Well, I'll tell you, the bill, I call truth as I see it, and most bills are gray areas. There are parts that I like and parts I don't like, and the tax bill is no exception. The economy is strong. It was getting stronger at the end of the Obama administration and has continued to. I think we're on a bit of a sugar high for reasons I can describe. But that bill had components I did like. I agreed. It was time to reduce the corporate income tax rate in this country to make us more competitive with the rest of the world. And I also wanted to repatriate dollars from overseas because that's a great stimulus to our economy. That part I agreed with. The part that was unfulfilled, that was a great promise of this bill, was that middle-income Americans would accrue benefits from it. And the truth is that about 80-some%, if not more, of the benefits accrue to the top 1% of this country and corporations. That is a disservice to tens of millions of people in this country. But what's particularly concerning to me is what it does to Minnesotans. And Minnesotans in the 3rd District. We all know that Minnesota is a higher tax state like California, New York, New Jersey. A lot of people take advantage of the state and local tax deduction. In fact, almost 50% of 3rd District residents do, to the tune of over $17,000 per tax return. So that is why I imagine that 12 of your Republican colleagues in the House voted against that bill, all of whom were from California, New York, and New Jersey. That's the responsibility of service, is your people over your party. And that bill, I think, did a massive disservice to Minnesotans, to the favor of Texans and Floridians, deep red states, a bill that is designed to help them, but most grave in my estimation, and sir, you have for many years said that one of the greatest threats to our country is the explosion in our national debt. And that is now exploded by the tune of $2 trillion, with a T, $2 trillion because of that tax bill.
Okay.
And the way that you said that we can address that is by attacking Medicare and Social Security and Medicaid in the next Congress. And I find that to be so counter counter the principles and values of the 3rd District.
Well, there you're
Erik
making
Paulsen.
things up. I never said we would attack Medicare or Social Security in the future Congresses. You just said that. In fact, the tax reform that passed has made Medicare stronger and Social Security stronger. And the Congressional Budget Office has affirmed that with more resources coming in. You know,
But it's added to the deficit too, hasn't it?
It's added to the deficit on the short term, but CBO also says and acknowledges in the long term, our debt to GDP ratio gets stronger over time. So we have to focus on the spending side of the equation. And absolutely, the Affordable Care Act needs to be addressed because those types of mandatory spending programs are driving up costs. Medicaid, Medicare, where the reforms are needed that we talked about, need to be addressed. The 83% figure, I think that you just mentioned, though, that's patently false. It's been fact-checked. Most of the benefits go to the middle class. A higher percentage of taxes now that are paid from wealthier individuals, those making over $1 million like yourself, versus those who are middle and low-income folks. Those are the folks that I've been working to help. Those were the benefits went to. I actually worked to fix the SALT deduction. At one time, it was proposed to have no SALT deduction. I wanted to make sure it was there for middle-income folks. That's why we had the $10,000 cap. Dean would want to restore that, but if you restored it, it would be only about a $10 tax benefit for those who are in the middle-income folks, but it would be $30-some thousand for millionaires like Dean and others. And he didn't answer the question how he would have voted on the bill.
Dean
How would you
Phillips.
have voted on the bill?
I would have worked hard to ensure that this economic expansion benefits the people that need it the most, not by favoring those who need it the least. And it's hard to have a debate when truth doesn't rise to the top, and that's why I'm running for Congress, Mike. This is what is so troublesome in our discourse, spending millions of dollars on television, disseminating lies and falsehoods, even in live debates. The truth, Congressman, is truth. And all of these, if people took the time to do a little due diligence and do some research, that would elevate. But now we live in an era, unfortunately, where we can't even decide on truth, and I'm on a mission to elevate that.
But you
So
don't
what's
want
the
to say
truth?
whether you would vote for the bill or not.
For that bill, in that current, I would vote to reduce the corporate income tax rate. I would have done so over time.
And you won't answer the question.
I would have. Well, let me explain. Because as a member of Congress, should I have that honor?
Vote yes or no?
Let me tell you. If I had been a member of Congress, I would have advocated very strongly for the people of my state and for middle-income Americans who should have derived more benefit from that tax bill. That is what I'm saying. As simple as that. I was not a member of Congress. You were. You served on the Ways and Means Committee that wrote the bill. You voted for it. I would have said that I would have argued very, very strongly for more accrual of benefits to middle-income Americans. That is truth. I was not there to vote on that bill, and I think it would have looked different had I had that opportunity.
And I worked to change the bill, including medical expense deductions, SALT deductions that were put in the bill to help middle-income folks, lowering rates for everybody. And Dean still won't say where he would on the vote.
I will say one more.
He did say it was disgusting, it was awful, it would be an easy vote to vote no. But now he won't say where he would vote. In fact, he won't say if he will vote to repeal the bill. As Nancy Pelosi has said, that's the first issue. If we're in charge as Democrats, we will vote on the House floor, is to repeal that. How would you vote on that, on the repeal?
Mike, if I might say, what I said is disgusting is the accrual of 80-some% of the benefits to the top 1% of this country, and I stand by that truth.
But it's been fact-checked to be wrong.
And the other fact of the matter,
Let him talk, please,
let me just say though, but the other fact of the matter is that the tax bill that you wrote and voted yes on is resulting in income tax increases for a lot of Minnesotans, thousands of Minnesotans. Do you agree with that?
Do you agree that thousands of Minnesotans have had their taxes cut?
There are winners.
The vast majority.
There are some winners and there are some losers, and the losers are across socioeconomic spectrums, and that's truth. And I speak with them every day, and you know that to be the truth. That is a tax increase on thousands of people in our state, and I would have done differently.
So you would have voted no?
Congressman, let me just ask, you've mentioned Medicare and Social Security. Would you pledge to protect those programs in terms of the benefits they pay to people who depend on them, or are changes needed that would cut into benefits to keep the programs financially solvent?
We need to make sure that we are protecting and preserving both Medicare and Social Security for our current seniors and future retirees, both on Medicare and for Social Security. I would hope that as Ronald Reagan was able to work with the Democrat Congress bipartisanly, that we will be able to find solutions to those types of issues. It will have to be bipartisan. On the Medicare front, that's why I've teamed up with Senator Ron Wyden. He's a pretty liberal Democrat from the state of Oregon, but we have teamed up for Medicare reforms for a better care, lower cost bill, which we've introduced several times, which we have pushed for reform within Medicare. It would actually save many, many billions of dollars without providing cuts. It's always the false choice of slashing benefits or cutting payments to providers. It doesn't need to be that way. We should be focusing more on health care rather than just sick care. And we can protect and preserve and save and secure those programs for future retirees.
So are you saying that benefits won't be cut?
Benefits will not be cut, and they shouldn't be cut for folks.
Okay. Dean Phillips, would you pledge not to cut benefits?
Not only would I pledge not to cut benefits, I'm on a mission to ensure that our retirees, people who've worked hard their entire lives, we return the favor to them and ensure that they are protected in their retirement years, the most underserved, disadvantaged people in this country. We are the most prosperous, successful country in the world's history. And I believe we are a country that has more compassion, more heart, and more ability to do better by more people, economically and otherwise. I would pledge to strengthen Social Security, to strengthen Medicare and Medicaid. They are the most successful programs in this nation's history, and Social Security, the most successful anti-poverty program in the world's history. And I think we can do better. And I want to. That's why I will join the Problem Solvers Caucus, Democrats and Republicans who have pledged to work together. They already have solutions to many of these challenges. And if leadership structures in both parties would afford the opportunity to have some of that heard on the House floor, I think we can get some work done, and I cannot wait to be a part of it.
And I should just mention also on the Medicare front, Dean, you opened up today with saying you're in favor of a Medicare buy-in. Now, that is a risky scheme for current Medicare recipients. And I don't know what that plan is, what it would cost, what the impact is, but you haven't shared those details. But it goes down the road to Medicare for all and strains, whether it's deficits for our country or whether it's putting current benefits at risk that seniors do receive.
And I see
that's the fact.
I see it just the opposite. The plan that I like the most right now is one called Medicare Extra. It's a thoughtful plan that's been issued by the Center for American Progress. And I think it's just the opposite. The notion of buy-in is that we're not handing out free health insurance to people. It would be a buy-in option, simply to provide more competition with private insurers, which I think in many parts of this country we should all agree is necessary. It's a plan that is easy to understand, it works well, and furthermore, available to all people in this country as an option. That should be favorable to members of both parties, and that is a solution that we can work towards. And by no means would I ever favor any program that could make it more challenging for those currently receiving Medicare. We should do just the opposite. And I think the way forward is to offer a buy-in, and that's the important phrase, Mike, is a buy-in, to be able to purchase Medicare at any age and any phase of your life, and strengthen Medicare so that it can have more negotiating power. And the fact is, just pharmaceutical pricing alone, we subsidize the world's pricing. We could save $230 billion a year. But my opponent, Congressman Paulsen, takes so much money from Big Pharma, I believe over $1 million in his career. It makes it really hard to vote for anything that would force Medicare to negotiate those prices. I take no money from any of those entities. I will vote on principle, not on party.
Let's be clear. The Center for American Progress themselves has said that a Medicare buy-in option is just a plan to give political cover for those that want to go in the direction of Medicare for all. In order for that to work as a buy-in, you would have to pay high premiums. No one is going to pay high premiums of their own choice. You would have to subsidize. The government would have to subsidize certain premiums and choices.
Isn't that what's happening
as
now
we do right now,
and
Congressman?
that's why it would put the program further at risk if you're having current seniors have to pay more to cover additional subsidies of someone else who wants to buy in. I would rather have the private market assist folks who aren't of Medicare age. We should have competition across state lines. We should have medical liability insurance reform. We should make sure that individuals and companies and small groups can band together to buy their health insurance so you can actually get it for coffee shop employees and make it available.
Mike, that's a great point of difference between us. We can do better by this notion that it's cover and that it's going to stress. You say the private sector is what can solve the problem. If anybody listening right now thinks that the private sector has done a good job of ensuring people that have high-quality health care at an affordable cost, I would challenge that, because I think we are in a very grave situation in this country, letting the private market try to afford something that the public has got to play a thoughtful role in, not an exclusive role, but an optional role. And that is my way forward, and goodness gracious, nobody that I know thinks that the private sector has done a good job of ensuring that health care is affordable and accessible.
Well, goodness gracious, I can't imagine that the government will have an adequate solution here. Look at the Affordable Care Act. Everyone was promised their premiums were going down by $2,500. They were promised they could keep their doctor. They were promised they could keep their health care plan. And you know what? We found out none of that was true. None of it. It screwed up Minnesota's healthcare. We were one of the top 4 states for seeing our insurance rates double recently. It's still a pocketbook issue for families and individuals and small businesses alike. It's something I hear about all the time. When you got high deductibles, high premiums, you get an insurance card, but you don't have insurance.
So what are you going to do about that?
20, if I might just say, 20 million more Americans now have health coverage because of the ACA. And for the first time, people with pre-existing conditions are protected. Those are great benefits. I will be the first to say that the ACA is imperfect. There's no question whatsoever. I agree. There's a thoughtful way forward, and one of the first things I would do, should I have the honor of serving, is fixing the ACA. But the progress that it made, the steps in the right direction, including some baby steps to rewarding prevention instead of just procedures, are exactly the way forward. We've got to do better, and we've got to do so via collaboration. Adherence to party versus principle is why we're in this quagmire.
One last word, Congressman.
I completely agree, and that's why I've been pushing healthcare initiatives and solutions on obesity and genetic counseling issues that are very bipartisan that can tackle this. And look, we have tried to fix, and Dean accuses it of sabotage, but when you have high deductibles, why shouldn't you allow healthcare savings accounts to be able to pay for some of those high deductibles that people are facing right now? That's a remedy. That's not sabotage.
And
that's
HSAs,
not hurting
as most
the
people
ACA.
know, those are wonderful for people of means who can afford their insurance. It is not doing anything to help those that are struggling so mightily. The people who
They
are
mostly are used for middle-income folks.
Congressman, who are one
Middle-income
illness away
folks.
from bankruptcy. The people who tell me almost every day that they can barely afford their medications. My goodness, we have got to do better. We've got to collaborate, and we've got to come up with ideas. No
that's
party has a
exactly what
monopoly
I've
on
been
ideas,
doing.
and that's
One
what I'm
at a
offering.
Yep.
Okay. Let me move on to another question from a listener. And this was Congressman Paulsen. Why not force President Trump to release his tax records, especially after the story in the New York Times this week that raised all kinds of questions about how his family used their taxes over the years?
Sure.
Why not require him to release his taxes?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, there was the story that came out by the New York Times or someone recently on some of that. Law enforcement always has the ability not to go to Congress or go to the Ways and Means Committee, but to go to the IRS. The independent counsel that's in place right now, Mr. Mueller, he's got complete authority to subpoena tax records. So that's not something we can do. In fact, we are only allowed, or I should say the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee is only allowed to look at tax returns for the purpose of looking at how tax law works. It is a privacy issue. We are not allowed to release tax returns. We are not allowed to do any of that. And that's been pretty clear with what the attorneys of the committee and of the House have advised. And it would be halted. And law enforcement has that ability, and the independent counsel has that complete authority.
Couldn't Congress pass a law that required any presidential candidate to release his or her tax forms when they're running?
I'm sure that could be true, as we have financial disclosure agreements, right, that are put in place for all of us, whether you're running for president or for Congress. I mean, Dean had to submit his public disclosure records just as I did. I mean, he delayed releasing them from May to August, but the president has to release those as well. So that's all for the public to look at, and that's open. Sure, the law could be changed, but right now the law is protect the privacy of any individual, and I think the president should release them. He said he would at one time. He should release them.
Well, if I might say, the congressman says, Mike, that Congress could do that, and that's another example of could, should, might. If I were a member of Congress, that is exactly what I would do. I think every president of the United States of America should be forced to release his or her tax returns. Without transparency, without truth, how can we move forward? And the answer is, if you're asking me, I would absolutely endeavor to ensure that exists, and Congress can do that. They should do that. When I serve, I will make a point of it.
If Democrats take over the House, what will happen? Will it be nonstop investigations of the president and nothing get done?
Mike, I'm endeavoring to serve in Congress because I'm so appalled at the leadership of both parties. And I'll say it again, the leadership of both parties really disappoints me. There is a better way to do this. I've spent an entire career collaborating. Nobody has a monopoly on ideas. I don't want to be an obstructionist. I do believe that our nation is best served by having a check and balance on the executive branch. In fact, most Republicans agree with that. That's how I would serve. I don't want endless investigations unless they're warranted. And my goodness, are some investigations warranted right now? And others, probably not. But I don't look at this through the lens of a party or through partisanship. I look at it as what's in the best interest of this nation. And obstruction is not what this is about. A check and balance is what it's about, and right now we have none, with one of the most dangerous and reckless administrations in this nation's history.
Erik Paulsen.
Well, I think Dean's playing into the hyperbole of what a lot of Democrat activists talk about. They want investigations. They want impeachment trial. They want all that going on. I think that chaos is not what the public in general wants to see. We have enough division that's there right now. And look, I mean, you can require the president and change the law to release his tax returns. You'd have to pass it and get the president to sign it. But should members of Congress or folks running for Congress release their tax returns? Would you release your tax return? Should I release my tax return? That is another issue. And so where do you stop? Where do you draw the line? I'm fine with it.
How do you, Congressman, let me ask you.
So you would release your tax returns. You vote to do that.
How is Congress done on overseeing this administration?
Well, Congress has an important check and balance. I think the most important check and balance is, one, making sure that the sanctity of our elections is secure. Investigations from the Intelligence Committee in both the House and the Senate going on. But most importantly, the independent counsel that was appointed. For me, and I was one of the first Republicans that said we need an independent counsel, when the FBI director was fired, the FBI is the neutral law enforcement arbiter, and that's the time to appoint an independent counsel. That investigation is going on, and they will get to the bottom of anything that's happening. It's still continuing today.
Let me turn to another question from a listener who asked about gun control. It's been a year, just a little more than a year since the Las Vegas shootings. Should the federal government pass any new gun laws? Congressman, start with you.
I think there are new gun laws that we can pass. We've passed several this year that enhance background checks to making sure you've got better information for domestic abuse that are getting put into the background check system. Your background check system is only good as the data that you have in it. We also lifted the ban on gun violence research by the CDC and others. That's important to do. But I think we can go a step further as well by having what are referred to as gun violence restraining orders. And it's one of the reasons why I got together with Ted Deutsch. He's the representative that represents the Parkland community where the tragedy happened also not long ago. And we came up with the concept of, at a federal level, having gun violence restraining orders. So if tips are given and someone thinks, a family member or a friend or someone is going to be a threat to themselves or to society, to others, they can actually have law enforcement step in, confiscate weapons, and you can have due process, you can have probable cause. It's worked in a handful of states that have implemented them, Republican states as well. And so some groups don't like that, but I think it is an appropriate response and the direction to go, not only to prevent tragedies, but also prevent a lot of suicides. And that's been a driving epidemic as well.
Dean Phillips.
Well, I think we should point out, in fact, I just recently, the NRA elevated Congressman Paulsen's grade from an A- to an A. My grade is an F, and by the way, I'm a firearms owner myself. Congressman Paulsen has taken over $20,000 from the NRA. Congress has done almost nothing, and everybody listening knows this, over the course of Congressman Paulsen's 10-year career in Congress to make our neighborhoods, our schools, our streets, and our country safer from gun violence. And I talk about gun violence prevention, not gun control. I talk about gun violence prevention. There are 5 steps, common sense steps that this nation can take with a thoughtful Congress and a thoughtful administration in place, starting with universal background checks. Just about every Democrat and Republican in this country agrees we need them. Why we don't have that is unbelievable to me. We also, I believe, should return to the notion of an assault weapons ban. We do not allow hand grenades, bombs, automatic weapons, or bazookas on our streets. Why our nation allows weapons that can cause mass human carnage in a matter of moments on our streets is something that I think we have got to take a serious look at. We also are a nation that should ensure that every public school has robust mental health professionals on staff to take care of our kids at the youngest ages. I do not understand why we have not made those investments so that we would save lives and money down the road. We need anti-bullying programs in every school because we all know how many young children are being bullied and what results from doing so. And Congressman Paulsen said the CDC can now study the issue, but the Congress has not afforded $1 to allow them to do so. And by the way, when we had a growing highway fatality crisis in the 1960s and 70s, our nation came together and looked at the reasons why, made propositions to Congress on how we could solve it, and we didn't ban cars. We made cars safer. We made streets safer. We lit them better. We ensured that seatbelts were in every car and airbags. We should look at this issue the exact same way. But I'm going to close this by saying until we reduce the money in politics and the stranglehold that the gun lobby and other lobbies have on Congress, a Congress that is bought and sold systematically, we will not be able to address a lot of these issues. And that's why nothing has been done on gun violence in 10 years that Congressman Paulsen has been in office. I intend to do much better by the people I hope to represent.
Erik Paulsen.
Well, I'm confused. We lifted the ban ban on gun violence research. We actually enhanced background checks. We made those changes. We fixed NICS. I voted to support more dollars going into the NICS background check system. I've actually focused on things that we can actually find solutions to. We have a constitutional right to bear arms. Now, you can say you want to get rid of that, but don't be dismissive of it, right? And so that's been the polarization that has happened that has prevented progress on a lot of these issues. So the ones that I've focused on, we've gotten some done across the finish line, but bipartisan support, I think, will lead to gun violence restraining orders. So we're making progress, and that's the response Congress, some of us are trying to take.
All right.
But this is really important, Mike. Lifting a ban, which was in place, the Dickey Amendment, lifting a ban on the CDC from studying the issue is one thing. That's easy. What Congress should have done and should do, and I hope to encourage once I have the honor of serving, is to mandate that they do so and afford resources to do so. Anybody that would disagree with that would really surprise me. And I have an understanding of the Second Amendment, and I support it, and Americans do have the right to bear arms. I'm one of them.
Okay.
But common sense has
Paulsen.
got to rule the day.
Well, common sense says lift the gun ban, the violence research, right? On the ban on gun violence research, which had been in place for decades. So of course you need to provide resources for that. The mental health care funding, that's been coming. We passed a significant bill just recently last week that not only provides a stopgap measure to the end of the year, but has important resources for school violence programs across the country. And that was a follow-up to the legislation that passed earlier last spring. The same percentage that I'm voting with Trump, lockstep and barrel, that was signed and passed into law.
We need to do better, and we will.
Let me just get to another listener question on climate change. First, are humans responsible? And second, what specific actions do you support to address it? And Dean Phillips, start with you.
I believe in science, first and foremost. I cannot even believe a statement like that has political connotations in this day and age. Congressman Paulsen not long ago said he wasn't smart enough to know if climate change was real and if it's caused by human beings. I believe that human beings are playing a role. And I have some thoughtful solutions because right now, again, Congress has done nothing to address what I consider to be one of the foremost challenges not just our country faces, but this entire world. And if we hope to serve our children and our grandchildren and preserve not just our country, but plan it for the future, we have got to act. I favor a notion that has Republican roots. In fact, one that is very deeply supported by someone who hosted a fundraiser for Congressman Paulsen just last week and who participated in my climate change forum. The notion is a carbon fee and dividend program, which is not a tax on energy because it returns every single dollar to American taxpayers, anybody with a Social Security number. We have got to provide incentives to migrate from a fossil fuel-based economy to a green energy economy. And that is unanimous in most people I speak with every day, including Republicans, who are conservationists. It's at the heart of conservatism. That is how we do this together. We are like-minded, but Congress's inactivity, unwillingness to address the most grave situation this country faces has got to change.
Erik
Well,
Paulsen.
we may be like-minded on this, where this is an issue of concern that needs to be addressed. Absolutely. It's one of the reasons why I'm in the Climate Solutions Caucus. Now, you have to join that caucus with the Republican and a Democrat. And I would think you would appreciate anyone that has collected additional information and make policy decisions based on that information that is coming in. So I care very deeply about conservation, protecting our environment, protecting the boundary waters. It's very authentic to me, Minnesota's Yellowstone. But at the same time, just pushing forward a carbon tax or an energy plan that will raise taxes on gasoline or on utilities that will hit a lot of middle and low-income folks. Now, you can have some sort of scheme where you're giving refunds and rebates and all that sort of thing, but you're going to have pain for a lot of people that use those resources. It's a very regressive tax, and I think that's the wrong direction to go.
So what specifically,
And by the way,
the question was, what specifically will you do, though?
Well, my solution is this. We need to come up with additional resources, right, as bipartisan folks in Congress, whether it's the Climate Solution Caucus or others, to come up with proposals to make progress on this issue. We've done that with supporting our military that wanted to take climate concerns into action, for instance, and we voted. There's a small minority of Republicans that voted with them. But I have to say, of all the issues that, Dean, you've been a hypocrite on, whether it's health care or the tax bill, this is probably the one that's the largest because you've been asking for a fossil fuel-free economy out on the campaign trail, and yet you've held hundreds of thousands of dollars in investments in coal and Halliburton and Exxon and energy stocks and sold those recently to divest after it was scrutinized. You're running for Congress. And so you're you're not backing up your position.
Congressman, let's stop.
It's hypocrisy.
On that subject, like most Americans, I hold mutual funds and I entrust the management of my investments to others. And once I discovered that I had investments in those, you're right, I divested. And I made a point of doing so. And should I be elected to Congress, I will put all my assets in a blind trust so there will be no conflicts. Ironically, my policy perspectives would actually reduce the value of those holdings if I'm successful. But what is real hypocrisy is joining the Climate Solutions Caucus, I believe this year. Was it this year? And having a 14 or 16% lifetime rating by the League of Conservation Voters. That is hypocrisy. That is truth, and we have got to start talking truth.
Quick response.
Actually, the truth is you not just invested in mutual funds, the Dakota Access Pipeline, right, which is an energy pipeline that's going on, that debate's going on right now. You had up to $150,000 invested in one individual pipeline.
Do you oppose the construction of the pipeline?
No, I support it. In fact, it's actually been shown to reduce greenhouse gases, but I think it's hypocrisy to say that you're against all these energy provisions and then have millions of dollars or lots of investments and reap the benefits of selling your assets and delay selling those assets or their disclosure of them from May until August when it can be scrutinized more by the media.
Well, Mike, like I said, I've asked my investment advisors to sell anything related to fossil fuels, and the fact that you would say that is surprising to me because Congressman Paulsen is one of the biggest takers of campaign money from big oil. So how can you make thoughtful decisions based on our environment when some of your biggest supporters is the fossil fuel industry? I will not take a dime from them. I never will. I never have. And that is a difference between our two campaigns. I take no PAC money, no special interest money, no federal lobbyist money, and no money from members of Congress because we need people in Congress representing principles and the people that they were there to serve, not the interests of financier campaigns. There's a grave difference.
That's exactly right. And it's why I always vote for my district, for my state, and for my community. And I never look at votes and connect them to any support that I may receive at all. But you're a hypocrite again on this issue too, because you're welcoming millions of dollars in TV ads from PACs that are being spent on your behalf right now.
Can we talk about that, Mike, for a moment?
Isn't it the law that you can't coordinate with those people?
You can't coordinate.
It is. It's the law. And Mike,
Correct.
As Congressman Paulsen knows, the hallmark of my campaign is to rid our politics from this horrific money, dark money, massive amounts of special interest money, massive amounts of federal lobbyist money. We have a Congress awash in money. If you want to know why votes don't match quotes by Congressman Paulsen, follow the money. I have for over 6 months asked Congressman Paulsen to sign a very simple pledge. It's called the Minnesota Way. It would mean no PAC money in our race, no PAC money, no special interest money, no self-funding, which is something in 1997, you might recall, right here in St. Paul. You authored legislation that would have gotten rid of PAC and special interest money in our elections, because you and I both at some point recognized that as a good thing. Also, it would disavow all the outside spending which is financing a lot of this miserable advertising that all of us hate to see on television. In 2016, Congressman Paulsen asked Terry Bonoff in a live debate to sign that very same pledge that I'm now offering to you. And the third component is simply showing up in public 2 times per month in a public forum to face voters and listen to their questions. What part of this do you disagree with?
Well, the part I disagree with is it's hypocritical. I oppose the hypocrisy that you have as a
what
part
is
of it.
hypocritical about getting rid of PAC, special interests, self-funding, and outside spending and showing up in public twice a month? What element?
This is what's hypocritical.
One at a time.
Answer.
I campaign and raise funds just like every member of the Minnesota delegation. I'm no different than anyone else. Amy Klobuchar raises money for her campaign the same way I do. I work with Amy Klobuchar on a number of issues. Dean, can you look in the camera right now and say that Amy Klobuchar or Tina Smith are not campaigning the Minnesota way?
I can look in the camera right now and I can look in the cameras right now, and I will do so. This is at the heart.
They're not campaigning the Minnesota
Congressman,
way.
if I can you asked me to look in the camera and say, I would like to say this is a wonderful opportunity. We can do better. We will do better if we take the money out of our political system. Democrats and Republicans are just as guilty. I am the only person running for Congress in the United States of America that takes no PAC money, no special interest money, no federal lobbyist money, and no money from members of Congress, because you know that they also use money to influence votes. I think both parties should come together and do this differently. I'm trying to lead by example. That is why I want that opportunity to be one voice that can build a chorus. And Congressman Paulsen asked me to look in the cameras and say everybody should do it. Everybody should do it. And I'm going to leave this with you once again, because today we could make a difference.
Let me just ask a quick question from a listener. Is the press the enemy of the people, as President Trump contends? And where do you get your news? And I just need like a 30-second response from each of you. Congressman?
Where do I get my news? I read the local papers. I read the Wall Street Journal. I read national publications as much as possible. I try to stay away from cable TV, to be honest.
Dean Phillips.
And I read the Wall Street Journal, I read the Star Tribune, I read the New York Times, and I make a point of watching both Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, and our national news channels because it's a responsibility to understand how people are receiving news in this day and age. And I will tell you, and this is not just to be funny on NPR radio, but I listen to NPR because I want truth, and it is hard to discern in this day and age. The fact that we have demeaned the profession of journalism and reporters, where many feel under threat, including at President Trump's rally yesterday in Rochester, is a grave risk to our democracy.
Okay, we are just about out of time, and you've been very gracious to come and talk, and I think we had a fair airing of a lot of the issues here. We didn't have an opening statement. I want to give you a little less than a minute to make a closing statement, and Dean Phillips, start with you.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks for offering us this opportunity to speak with voters through the airwaves. Our country is facing a very dark period right now. But I want people to know that we can be optimistic and we can be hopeful because I started this campaign out of anxiety after the 2016 election. And I can tell you it has been converted to optimism. The extraordinary people that I visit with every day gives me a source of hopefulness that I never knew existed. I was driving here today on 394. It was dark, it was rainy. Of course, we know what's going on in the Senate today. And I saw a crocheted heart on the overpass on 394. And I thought that one act of kindness changed my day. We are a nation that has got to come together. I want to inspire that. We have 64,000 contributors, 1,500 volunteers, Republicans, Democrats, and independents coming together. That's the hallmark of my campaign. I want to bring it to Washington.
You there. Congressman, I asked you the first question. You get the last one.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thanks for hosting our debate today. I will say this. In a highly challenging and politically charged environment, I'm one of those members of Congress that has actually been able to work across the aisle and get things done. And it takes a lot of work and effort to get folks to sign on to your bills, but if it's a good idea, I want both Democrats and Republicans on it. So I've gotten important issues done for Minnesota, whether it's repealing the medical device tax, whether it's protecting the Boundary Waters, whether it's making sure that human trafficking and sex trafficking is all going to be behind us. These are personally very gratifying issues, and I pour my heart and soul in them. And I'm always going to be accessible and a good listener, because to be effective, you've got to collect more information and make values and judgments based on the information you're collecting. And I'll continue to do that and transcend the partisan divide.
I want to thank you very much for coming and for speaking to our audience today. Congressman Erik Paulsen, thank you.
Thank you.
And Dean Phillips, thank you for coming.
Mike, thank you very much.
That is our program for today. Thank you for listening, and thanks everybody who sent in questions. We'll see you next week. For now, have a great weekend.